However, it will have to be there to remind you of things. All right. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yep.
Perfect. I will try not to bump into it. These bifocals kind of get me after a while. Perfect. Thank you so much. Like Diane, my dear friend, I learned her name as Diane, and I know my husband has like 5 different names. Whether he's in the city working or wherever he is, Minnesota, he's Franco. In New York, he's Skin. He has no hair. Everyone just calls him Skin. That's his name. So he's been many different names. So Diane, thank you so much for that introduction. That was entirely a lot of words, but all of those words she spoke to me, I speak back to her. I want to thank you all for the privilege of being able to be here today. This is a privilege for me. I was very happy that back many years ago, I was able to be Ladies Fellowship President at Grace Baptist Church in Owatonna. And the pastor's wife was Shirley Kittle, and she helped me get past all of my insecurities as far as talking to women. I do enjoy getting up in front of people and talking, as long as I know what I'm talking about. When I struggle, when I don't know what's going on, or I can't, the words don't come, but God is so faithful. And I came to know the Lord at a very early age. I grew up in a Christian home. I remember playing outside in the backyard. I was about 5 years old, and I don't remember if it was a conversation with my sisters or anyway. In my mind, I was thinking about the fact that if I was going to go to heaven, I needed to invite Jesus into my heart. So I remember going in. Mom was at the sink peeling carrots, and so I told her, Mom, I don't want to go to hell. And she said, well, okay. So she sat down and she went through what it means, and did I know what I was thinking and talking about? And so we sat down together at the kitchen table, and she helped me and led me to the Lord at that point. And then I followed in believer's baptism at the age of 7 and grew up in a Christian home, like I said, in a good church. And then the summer that I turned 16, I was just sharing with Marcia and Roger, had to read their names, that my husband, he is a New Yorker. He came from New York, and he had come to Minnesota and started coming through a series of events, started coming to Normandale Baptist Church. And I remember Mom and Dad coming to pick me up in Ohio. That summer, I was staying with my grandma, and I'm saying, oh my goodness, you should see this man that's been coming to church. And I'm like, sweet, I'm all about that. So I saw him and his New York accent and Italian, and he had lots of hair then, and he was big and muscular, and I was like, I think I found who I needed to find. So he came to know the Lord, and he was a sponge. And to put me to shame, growing up, learning everything, to me, it was just second nature. But to him, when he came to know the Lord, it was, he was a sponge. And he would ask me things like, what's sanctification mean? What's regeneration? And he had all these words, and I'm like, I don't know. So I remember one time he called, and my mom said, Frank was on the phone, and I said, tell him I'm not home. And she said, no, you talk to him. So that challenged me then to get back and learn and be able to have, because the Bible says we need to be able to give an answer of the hope that we have that's in us. So a couple of years later, he went to Pillsbury for a year and a half, I think it was. I graduated in June 3rd or 4th. We got married June 23rd. And we both went to Pillsbury. I went for a semester and then decided, I'm not cut out to go to school. I just want to be a mom. I was already the wife. I want to be a mom. So we started our family, and 6.5 years later, we had 4. So that kept me busy. Our oldest daughter still lives in Minnesota. We've got 4, but they're spread out in 4 time zones. So we've got our oldest daughter is in Minnesota, still in the home that we have there in Owatonna. Our older son is in Tampa. He teaches high school biology. His wife teaches high school science and earth science, I think she does, in the same department at school, and they have 2 wonderful grandbabies for me. And then our younger son is in near Denver, Colorado, and him and his wife and 2 more lovely grandbabies. And then our youngest daughter is in Port Orchard, Washington, which is about an hour from Seattle, across Puget Sound, with her husband and 3 grandbabies. So then and we have a business in New York, so I'm pretty much in motion. Don't stand still too long. So anyways, that being who I am, and now you know that about me, so let's get started about what we have to talk about today, and let's open in a word of prayer. Lord, I am so blessed to be here today. I thank you for the events that you set in motion that led each woman to be here. I thank you for the gifts and the opportunities that you have given me. I thank you for the talents that you have provided in my life and the willingness, Lord, for you to use them through me. I pray that you would bless our time together. I pray that you would help the words to come to my heart and my mind that you want these ladies to hear, and that they would be encouraged and want to serve you more. And I thank you in Jesus' precious name. Amen. Okay, so one thing that I have always loved to do is bake. I remember when I was in junior high school, I was the middle of 3 sisters. There were no brothers, so I was just 3 girls. And Mom and Dad, I did not have the normal parents. Well, yeah, they were normal, but they built airplanes. So Mom and Dad built 2 airplanes in the garage, one at a time, obviously. So it was when I was in junior high, and it was after supper, and I would, the time that I had to do the dishes, I would say, Mom and Dad were headed out to the garage, can I bake? And Mom would say, as long as you find a recipe, and you find all the ingredients that have to go with that recipe, and you clean the kitchen when you're finished, you can do whatever you want to do. Okay, so I would finish the dishes as quickly as I could, and I pulled down my favorite book was the Betty Crocker cookie book, because it had pictures along with the recipe. So I would go through and I'd check the cupboard and make sure I had all the ingredients that I needed to, and I would bake. And then when I finished, you have your paper towel out, and you line up all the cookies in rows so after they're cooled off, and then I'd wait, and then Mom and Dad would come in from the garage, and my dad would walk past the table and, what's this? And I said, I baked cookies. So he'd take 2 or 3 of them, and he'd walk off, and he'd eat them, and then I'd wait. And he'd come back, and he'd take a few more, and it just, the joy to me was to please my father. I loved that he loved it. Even the times that he bit into one and said, these are a little hard. Are these hockey pucks? That was one of his things. But he still ate them. It didn't stop him from enjoying them. So when we want to create something, it's important for us to have the ingredients and the recipe. We need to study our Bible to find the recipe that God has. The choices that we make are those ingredients after we have gone through the recipe, and we need to learn. And all God wants us to do is to have that knowledge and put that into practice in our lives in order to serve Him. Now, just like there are an infinite number of different kinds of cake pans, I have probably, oh my goodness, I can't even tell you, maybe 30 cake pans still somewhere in my garage. My daughter, oldest daughter, has taken over, so she does a lot with cakes as well. But just as there are so many different kinds of cakes, shapes that you can make it into, we are shaped and molded by the people that are around us. So it's important for us to associate with like believers and people that we can encourage, we can become molded into that person that God wants us to be. Now, if you took a cake pan and you got it ready, you greased it and you floured it, and you took your cake mix and you mixed it up exactly like the recipe said, and you put your cake batter into the cake pan and you set it on the counter, and even if you set it in the sun, what's going to happen? Probably nothing. You need to put that into the oven. There has to be some sort of external force that is going to turn that batter into cake. The same is in our lives. There is going to come the heat of trials at points in our lives when God uses that to mold us and to shape us into the person that He needs us to be. And it's not fun. It's not fun, but James 1:24 says, "Consider it joy when you face trials of many kinds, because you know you can be confident that the testing of your faith produces perseverance." That would be patience and motivation and determination. And when your perseverance finishes its work, you will be mature and complete, lacking nothing. In Malachi 2, it speaks of the refiner's fire. The refiner's fire is not like a forest fire, which just indiscriminately burns across everything. But this purifies. It separates all the impurities that would ruin its value so that the best is left behind. Now, as the cake bakes, the heat intensifies. And I'm going to see if I can get this right, because my husband challenged me this morning to change a little something because he works with insulation. And okay, so your cake is in the oven. Your pan is metal. The heat that is coming around, usually conventional oven, the heat comes up from the bottom. So whatever's touching the metal is going to bake first. So you've got your sides, and the cake is going to start pulling away from those sides, making the top crown. So it's going to, the last thing it's going to bake is be in the middle. So what he taught me, because, well, I didn't get to that part yet. Anyways, he grew up baking. So I took pieces of, this was an old towel. It's been used a couple of times. I zigzagged the edges. I just cut it strips, zigzag the edges. Otherwise, you have little pieces of towel covering the floor when you're done. And then after that's done, whatever size cake you need it to be, if you need it to be 2, you want to be able to have it go all the way around the cake. So you would take this, you would put it under the faucet, get it wet, wring it out, not totally dry, just so it's not dripping. Then you take that, you put it around your cake pan and fasten it with a pin, and that goes into the oven. Now what that does, it creates, here's his words, a heat sink. And what that does, it makes the outside edges of the pan, it's kind of a buffer between the heat and the batter that's in the pan. So that batter is not going to pull away, and it's going to raise evenly. So like this cake right here, you can see how it's flat on the bottom. When I do my cakes, I flip them over. Now, if it does happen, and sometimes it does happen, that it's got a little bit of a crown, that has to be cut off. You can use that many different ways, but you're wasting cake. Or you're eating it, and you really shouldn't be eating it. That's one thing I used to do. I have to cut that off, and then you eat it, and then, yeah. Or the kids, or whatever. But in order to have that flat surface for it to sit on your cake, piece of tape, yeah, there, my word just went away. Plate, or cardboard, or whatever you're going to put your cake on. You need to have, this kind of helps to have that, prevent that from crowning. The next thing that I want to talk about is the solid foundation. Now, the cardboard, when you pick it up, obviously this one's a lot lighter. This cake probably weighs 8 pounds. Once you get all of your fillings and all of your buttercream and everything on it, even though it's strong, you can pick it up from the sides and it's going to hold. It's not going to. I have had some gentlemen come pick up cakes at my house, a size that's bigger than this, especially when their wives send their husbands to pick up the graduation cakes, and I say, both hands underneath, and they do this. And one I actually caught as it started to go. So, yes, important to have a solid foundation. Another thing is when you're building a wedding cake, or any cake that's tiered, you have to have a solid foundation for that to set on, or you're not going to be able to transport it. So one of the verses that God laid on my heart was, and I think we're all familiar with the story of the wise man and the foolish man, Matthew 7:24-27. Everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against the house. Yet it did not fall because its foundation was on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like the foolish man who built his house on sand. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the wind blew and beat against that house, and it fell with a great crash. You do not want your cakes to fall with a great crash, or your lives. So it's important for us to have a solid foundation on which to build our lives as well as our cakes. Now, going back to my husband, his dad had an Italian pastry shop in East Harlem in New York. And so he grew up baking and knew a lot about baking. And they both taught me, his dad and my husband, both taught me a lot about what was baking. And one of them is the fact that if you had a choice between a piece of sponge, which is what they called the cake part, a piece of sponge with a little frosting on top, or a cake with 3 layers of cake and 2 layers of filling, fruit filling, most people would choose the one that had the good insides and the fruit and the filling on the inside. So, what I'd like to do now is just kind of demonstrate when we bake our cakes, rather than doing them in separate cakes and then trying to build them, which would be a little more difficult to get things to balance out. You would take your string, and even on the cakes when I thought I couldn't get 2 cuts through it, my husband says, you have a reputation, 3 layers of cake, 2 layers of filling. So, I stuck with that, and look back, let's see if I can get that. So, kind of line it up around the sides, and you're just going to bring that through the middle. And we'll do one more. I remember now that this cake was frozen this morning, and I thank the Lord that it's just a tiny bit frozen in the middle. All right, get that through there. All right, so then when we're working on our cakes with our 3 layers, you want to be careful to take it off and keep it in the same, your edges the same, because when you put it back together, if it's a little bit off, it's gonna go back straight again. Yep, and this is not quite as thick as I wanted it to be. Okay, that's still a little bit frozen. Anyways, okay, so the fruit. Many of them require, now this cake here, I cut up strawberries for 1 layer, fresh strawberries. The other layer has lemon, a filling with kiwi. Peeling that fruit, sometimes God has to peel away things in our lives to help us to learn to be the people we need to be. And sometimes that peeling is not really fun to go through. But again, God gives us the grace if we're willing to learn, if we're willing to accept that He is the blessed controller of all things, then we can be okay with what He brings into our lives. So, my daughter and I have developed, well, I had developed and she's changed a little bit since she's in charge now, but many, many different flavors of cakes and filling combinations. So I'm just going to set this up here if anybody wants to look at it later. It was just kind of, I would say that our most popular was either the chocolate raspberry or the vanilla with the strawberry. Those were very popular. Otherwise, I mean, in season we could go to cinnamon streusel cake with pumpkin cream cheese filling. So we had lots of different ones that we like to play with. Okay, next up, the frosting. All right, if I took my frosting ingredients, and we have chosen to use shortening versus butter. Butter gives it a little different consistency, plus it gives it a little bit off color. It's always going to be a little bit of a cream color. And when you're working with wedding cakes and things, you want your buttercream to be, even though I call it buttercream, it's not butter, it's butter flavor. But I'm getting away from that. Okay, so if I took my ingredients, my shortening, my powdered sugar, my egg white powder, and my flavorings, and I put that in a mixing bowl, and then I took my knife and tried to scoop that out and to put it on the cake, number one, it's going to taste awful. Number two, it's going to be very difficult to accomplish to get that onto the cake. But you put it in your bowl, you put it on your mixer, you get that whip going, and you get that air incorporated into the buttercream, gets it nice and light and fluffy. That is something that can complement the outside of your cakes. So we're going to, when we dress the cake, and I'm not going to put everything together here, we'll play with that when we're finished, we'll let people come up and do what they'd like to do with it. But when you're going to dress your cake, there's many different ways, different tips that you can use to accomplish different designs. So I did 4 different ones here so you could kind of get an idea, and I will hold this up, I think. All right, so the side facing you would be like I would maybe put more of an old-fashioned wedding cake, not so much the way they do them now, but what was on my wedding cake with the swags. This one on the end would be a basket weave. And that's not as hard as it looks, and I'll be happy to demonstrate that one. And then you've got your basic lines coming up. My daughter tends to use this one quite a bit because she doesn't like to try to get them too even on the sides. It's a little more difficult sometimes. And then, now she is the champion of the rosettes though. These are nothing compared. Hers look like actual roses when she does it. Mine didn't, but I figured, okay, we'll try it. So there's different ways. And then, let's see if we can get this tilted up here without it going anywhere. When you come up and look, these are little chocolate mice on here, and I just wrote Happy Valentine's Day to the big cheese. But when you look on top, there are little holes for the Swiss cheese, as well as I had taken a Scott paper towel. There's lots of different paper towels, but Scott has ones that are just lines. And after the frosting has set, after you've smoothed it over, lay that across and gently pull that back, and you've got your design that's on the top of the cake. Plus it evens it out nicely. People see us in different ways, and not just by the clothing that we wear on the outside, but by our actions and our words. We need to be filled or dressed with the fruits of the Spirit: love, and joy, and patience, and kindness, and gentleness, and self-control. I was reminded in a Bible study that I'm doing right now that even though we are redeemed by the blood of the Lamb, we have accepted Jesus. He sees us as perfect. We still have our sin nature. And there's things that we still tend to go back to. We're not perfect. And sometimes those mistakes and mishaps that we make, we think that we have totally ruined our lives, but God doesn't see it that way. He's just waiting for us to turn back around and confess our sin and to be a part of His life again. I had a very busy weekend many years ago. I could have upwards of 10 graduation cakes, especially May and June, and a wedding cake on one weekend. So I'd start baking the beginning of the week, wrap them all like I had in the saran wrap. They went into my big chest freezer, had them all stacked up, baked early in the week, and then later start taking things out and getting them ready to put on my boards, get my cardboards ready, covered with foil, and get busy with things. Well, this particular weekend, it was near Father's Day. I had a cake that was another size as big as this, and I usually had them out of the reach of our yellow lab who loved to have grills. So it had come out of the oven, and I had it sitting on the table to cool, and I turned back around, and her face was up there, and she had eaten the whole corner off the cake. And she knew as soon as she looked at me, and crumbs on her little face, and she went and sat down really fast. So I thought, okay, that's a lot of cake. You can't just throw that away. And there wasn't anything else at the time that I could think of to cut it up, whatever. So I stood for a minute and I thought, I did not make my father a Father's Day cake yet. So I took my knife, and I cut scallops all around that area so it looked like a big bite was taken out of it. And I filled it and I frosted it and I wrote, Happy Father's Day from the dog. That worked out well. So there's many times, even though we think something is totally ruined, God can use that. Use that to help us to change and to learn. Now, not everyone has the same talents or abilities. And no one is better than anyone else. God can use anyone. There's a friend of mine in Minnesota that they had a water leak in their upstairs, and it had come down through to the lower level, and pretty much they had to rip everything out. And insurance covered some of it, but not for what they would have to replace everything. So my husband is a very generous man, and he looks for ways to give, and we are able to share. And we were blessed to be able to share with them, to finish up and help them to get this taken care of financially. And I remember she came to me and she had tears in her eyes and she said, "There's no way we're going to ever be able to repay you for this." And I said, "We're not looking to be repaid for anything." And she said, "Well, what I could do is I will faithfully pray for your family and your children and your grandchildren every week." And I said, that far outweighs anything that I would ever be able to give her or do for her. And she has faithfully prayed for my children, and I will tell you, and this was within the last month or two, that I had just given her a very brief description of something that had occurred, and it was the same day that I witnessed God move a mountain that I thought there was no way, that it would be years before this could be healed. And I'm not saying that it was her, but I know, and God can do anything. He doesn't need us to pray to make things happen, but He gives us that opportunity because it just so blesses and fills, gives us that strength, gives us the light to see that He is in control of everything. So I challenge you ladies, don't look and say, "Well, I can't do it like she does." Don't compare to other people. Pray and ask God, what can I do? What can I do to help someone else? And He will show you. You just have to open your eyes and take that opportunity to serve Him. And I will tell you, you will be blessed beyond measure. Thank you. God bless you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, I'm kind of going to clear things up. We can cut the cake or whatever you'd like to do first, and then we'll bring everything out and people can, if they want to play with cake and see what they can do, I've got some bags.